So in the last video, we talked about the different types of securities. In this video, we're going to dive into more like when do you give what type of security to different people. So if we think about the life cycle of a company, the way it works is that first you incorporate, then you give shares to founders, give shares to early employees, and then you create an equity plan. Create an employee equity plan, and then give options to employees. Actually, before then, to later employees. Before this, you may actually raise funding on a safe/convertible note. Out of the safe and convertible note, safes are now more of the common way to be able to fundraise. We see that convertible notes sometimes are used more internationally or for companies that existed like 5+ years ago. Most fundraising is now done via safes. So kind of in this order of events is you do incorporation, you give shares to founders, and you give shares to early employees. The reason that you're giving shares to founders before you create the equity plan, so when you give shares to the initial set of founders, typically this is just common shares. So an example would be you incorporate with 10 million authorized shares, and you have two founders, so each founder gets 4 million. To each founder. So at this point, what's happened is if there's two founders, this cap table looks like 10 million authorized shares. Founder 1 has 4 million shares, and founder 2 has 4 million shares. So each founder actually owns 50% of the company. Authorized shares, it just represents the number of shares that you can give away total in the company, but doesn't actually represent ownership. Because the number of shares that you've only set aside in this company is 8 million, and that's 4 million to each founder. So say there's also employees at this company, and employee 1 is the first employee of the company, and they were there from the very beginning. This employee, if they own 1 million shares, everyone's ownership would then change to each founder. So in this case, what you have is founder 1 and 2 each have 4 million shares, but now the denominator is 9. So to get ownership, this is the calculation that you would then do. So as a quick recap, authorized number of shares doesn't actually matter for calculating ownership. What you actually instead need to look at is how many shares have actually been allocated out of the company. So one of the reasons that you initially give shares directly to early employees as well as founders rather than giving them options is because the price of these shares is really low. When companies first get started, the price of each share often is 4 zeros and a 1. So if you do the math here, I think this is like $4. But when you do a round of funding and then your shares are actually worth something, so $40, incorrect. When you actually do a round of funding, your shares are now worth something, because if you raise funding with a safe and say you raise on a $15 million valuation, well, now an investor has come in and says, actually, I think your company is worth $15 million. So you can no longer make the case that the price of the share is this inexpensive. The price of the share now has to be worth more. If the price of the share is more, then you can't just give something away to someone that's worth a lot, because then they also have to pay taxes on top of that. So that's why you end up giving options to employees who join later. Options don't represent shares themselves, rather a right to be able to buy the shares. By giving employees options, you get around the tax questions until the options are exercised. So as a recap, the way that you determine ownership is based on the number of shares that is actually issued out of the company, not the number of shares that's been authorized. And the reason that you give shares to companies when they're first getting started is because the price of the shares is super low. But when the company is larger, instead of giving them shares, you would switch to giving employees options, because now the company is worth more. If the company is worth more, the price of the shares is higher, and you can't just give someone shares without having them pay taxes on it.